Following is an appearance by Governor Scott Walker at McDonough Manufacturing in Eau Claire. Governor Walker spoke about his proposed budget repair bill. After that, an Eau Claire City Council special meeting to discuss a resolution proposed by Council Member Mark Olson opposing aspects of the governor's budget repair bill. It all took place on February 15th.
No, that's all right. That's good. We appreciate it. Glad to have you. No, it's about the right size what we've had before. So.
Is it?
Yeah, that's good. Afternoon.
Hey, how you doing?
Good to see you.
Oh.
Good to see you.
Our most senior guys.
Good to see you. I'll say hi to everybody first.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you. Hi. Good to see you. What's right up there? Sure.
It is truly an honor and a privilege to welcome Governor Scott Walker to McDonough Manufacturing. McDonough has been in the Eau Claire community since 1888. When my grandfather took over the company, it was near bankruptcy, and he saw it through bankruptcy. Brought it back on its feet. My dad took over, saw it through some tough times. Now Matt and I are here, and we are also seeing some tough times. But we know that with the help of elected officials and the good work of the people at McDonough Manufacturing, we're going to see it through, and we're going to be able to say we have been in business for 200 years. So with that, Governor Walker, welcome to McDonough Manufacturing.
Thank you. Thanks. 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 Well, and I was laughing in the wind. I said, I feel like I'm weighed down. The local TV folks wanted all their mics on, so if I lean too far that way, it's just because I'm all mic'd up. But it's good to be back in town. Good to be back on a beautiful day. I said I thought the warmth was going to start on Thursday. It's already starting today, so it's pretty good. But by the weekend, it'll probably be back to about 20 or 30 degrees again, much like what we expect in Wisconsin, at least through the next month or so. My reason for today is coming by is really I go out about 2 or 3 times a week outside the Capitol, and I appreciate giving me a chance to share a little bit about what we're up to and what we're looking to do in the future to get Wisconsin working again. One of the things I found is getting out of the Capitol is real helpful. I used to do that when I was the county executive, getting out of the courthouse, and now getting out of Madison, particularly when I go and visit companies all across the state, big and small, and more often than not. Today, my last couple stops have been at mid-sized manufacturing companies, and I think it's a good way to be connected to what's going on all across the state of Wisconsin. For me, it's starting out, it's real simple. I've got in my pocket, if I can get it amongst all these wires here, not get short-circuited, but when I was first elected that night, November 2nd, instead of putting my name out on the podium, I had a sign like this put up, and I've been carrying a sticker like this around, and I have a sign like this in my office as well. Because for me, what I want to make a very clear message out there is that things have changed. Wisconsin is indeed open for business. So we started with that as a symbolic change. And we started, in fact, not only with that, but a few weeks back, I was on all the state lines. I was over by the St. Croix, up by Superior, down by the state line by Illinois, over by Dubuque, and changing the signs when you come in the state of Wisconsin. The big brown signs that are shaped like the state itself, instead of having Wisconsin welcomes you and then the name of the governor, I put a shingle out there that actually had, instead of my name, it says open for business. And again, all a part of telling the message that things have changed here in the state of Wisconsin. Since January 3rd, what we've tried to do is send an even clearer message, not just in terms of style or in symbolism, but in terms of substance, to show people all across the state, as well as businesses from outside of our state that might be looking into Wisconsin, that things have changed more than just a slogan or a sign on the state line, that there's substantive changes. So we lowered the tax burden for employers. We put incentives, tax incentives specifically for people who create jobs in the state. We've made changes in terms of cutting through the lawsuit abuse and making it easier to deal with litigation costs for employers here. We've put in place changes that will come up next week in terms of regulatory reforms, so that the regulations we have are science-based and predictable, but they're not things that are about making it harder for companies like yours to put people to work. We've done all those things, and those have all passed really in literally the first days in office. And people asked me a couple weeks ago, one of the national reporting crews said, well, why are you moving so quick? And I said, well, it's real simple. I spent the last 2 years applying, talking to you, the interviewing committee of the state of Wisconsin, the voters, applying for the job of wanting to be the CEO of this state. And I said to get this state working again, particularly when we face both an economic and a fiscal crisis, we had to take swift and aggressive action. And just like somebody coming in as the CEO of a new company wouldn't wait a year or 6 months In our case, we didn't even wait a month. We started on January 3rd with all those things. We called the legislature into a special session. We started acting on those bills right away, and we've had success even in the first 5 or 6 weeks. Now, on top of that, said our two big challenges are, one, there's a challenge when it comes to the economy, to the economic situation, to the fact that all across the state for the past year or two, I bumped into people who are ultimately small business owners and individuals who are scared about where the economy's at, who are hurting. And so we said we got to take immediate action to make it easier for employers to put people to work, but to put those folks who are out of work today back to work here in the state of Wisconsin. The other big challenge we face now and going ahead is fiscal. It's the budget. I was just on the phone a couple minutes ago. I pulled into the airport. We've been flying around the state, but I was on the phone for about a half an hour with governors from all across the country. And in all 50 states, there's only 4, I believe, that have surpluses. Every other state has a deficit. And so we have a challenge much like everybody else's. Our challenge is about $3.6 billion, with its B, billion dollars. And so what we've looked at is trying to do something different than what other states are doing. In New York State and in California, the governors there have proposed budgets that cut billions of dollars from schools, from local governments, from the university system, without any recourse, without anything in terms of being able to balance that all off. What I said here is I want to balance a budget. I want to do it while protecting the middle class by not piling more dollars on to the taxpayers, which is what they did in Illinois. In Illinois last month, they raised taxes and fees on businesses and on individuals, dumping it on the employers, dumping it on the middle class taxpayers. Said that doesn't work for us. That just drives jobs out of the state. Instead, we wanted to find a way that didn't add more burden to the taxpayers of this state, and at the same time send a clear message that we could balance our need for core services and still balance our budget. And so what I introduced last Friday, which is why I've got a few friends outside welcoming me here today, is because I've asked for some simple changes. I think they're pretty modest changes, actually. You compare what we're asking for compared to what you pay and what others pay. I was just at a company to begin with where the employees pay about 50% of their health care costs in Hobart today. I was just at a company before this where in order to keep people from being laid off en masse a couple years ago in 2009, they temporarily suspended their matching payment in terms of their 401k. All those things were done from the mindset of saying we have a tough economy, and in an effort to try and preserve jobs, they made some changes. In some cases temporary, some cases long-term. In our case for the state, what we're looking at is what I think are some pretty modest changes. We're asking all of our state employees, as well as local government employees, we'll do through the local governments as well, to make half of the contribution of the money we set aside for their retirement, 5.8%. That's everybody. It includes me. It'll affect my family just like everybody else's. It includes the legislature, it includes all our appointees, as well as everybody else, whether they're in a union or not. It affects everybody across the board. The other big change, big in terms of politics, but I think relatively modest in terms of real dollars, is we're going to be paying, again, all of us included, are going to be paying about 12.5% of the premium cost for health care. That's half the national average. It's half the national average, and it's much less. It's considerably less than the 50% at the firm I was at earlier today. For us, that means instead of paying about, for a family plan at the low end, the most cost-effective family plan we have, instead of paying about $40 a paycheck, our employees are going to be paying about $80 a paycheck for that particular plan. Now, it varies depending on which plan they have, but for that low-cost basic family plan, which is the one I have, again, it's a little bit more than $40 a month now. It'll be a little bit more than $80, a paycheck, which is every 2 weeks. To me, that's still pretty realistic. You're talking about less than $200. I would wager to guess that at this firm and most other companies across the state, employees are paying that much or a whole lot more depending on where they're at. We think that's reasonable. We think that's a reasonable expectation to say as the counter to the fact that if we don't, the equivalent for the savings we get, $300 million in the next budget, would be the equivalent of laying off between 5,500 to 6,000 employees at the state level. It's a similar number of 5,000 to 6,000 numbers of local government employees. Now, again, I don't know about all you, but I, for one, don't want to see any people, whether they're in government or in the private sector, laid off during these tough economic times. I think the last thing we want are layoffs. And so making those sorts of reasonable changes, I think, is something that's good, not only for this budget, but the other benefit to that is it sets the table so that in the future, as the economy grows and our wages are going to be set fixed off of the CPI, which is a factor that grows as the economy gets better. So today, the CPI is flat. A year or two from now, as the economy booms, and we're going to get back to that because we went through the same thing in the late 80s in Wisconsin, and we got better going into the 90s, and things were booming again. As we get more people working in this state, it's going to have a positive impact, and people are going to benefit from that. But in the meantime, we've got to collectively be together. Now, the benefit for that is not only that we balance the budget. This is one piece of it. You're talking about a $3.6 billion hole. State government employees, in terms of the changes we'll all make, myself included, will provide about $300 million worth of savings. There'll be a considerably higher amount in the savings we get from local government employees, but that's still just a piece of the puzzle. There's still got to be major reforms when it comes to entitlement programs, giving people that temporary safety net they need if they fall on tough times, but not making it a permanent lifetime entitlement, helping people move to the workforce. Those are all important parts of what we're doing as well. That's what we're going to come out with a week from today, actually, next Tuesday, the 22nd. But I think it is important for people to know because, again, you're going to hear all sorts of stories. You're going to hear all sorts of ruckus out there. But what we're doing is really about balancing the budget. Now, I said this last Friday, but Wisconsin's broke. We've been broke for years. We've been broke under Republicans and Democrats alike, so I'm not singling out one party or the other. The fact is this state has been broke, and they pushed it off too many times into the future, and right now we're forced to deal with it. But now is our opportunity to do it right, so that 2, 4, 6, 8 years into the future, our kids and our grandkids aren't the ones paying with the chaos and aren't the ones looking at the massive layoffs and the other problems that are going to come out of a budget that isn't going to be balanced. That helps us because I get back to where I started, which is all about jobs, about getting this state working again. For us, we know that when employers look at expanding or other employers look at coming into this state, part of what they look at is how stable is the government. Certainly they look at the bottom line, what's the cost, taxes, utilities, health care, all those things are factors you look at. But also part of it, particularly if you're an investor, investing in a company to help them grow, is where's that state, where's that area, where's that region headed? If it's headed in a positive direction, that's a place that people want to be. It's a company they want to invest in. It's a region they want to be a part of. In our case, it's a state that people want to be a part of. We want to be one of those states where people want to invest and put more into capital, which puts more people to work, which ultimately gets this state working again. And that's probably the best contrast between what we're doing now versus what they're doing in Illinois. Not only did they raise taxes to try and deal with their deficit on both individuals and employers, the problem is they ignored the very thing that got them in trouble in the first place. In their state, with their public employee pension system, they're only about half funded. So it's only a matter of time, probably less than 2 years, it may even be a year from now, where they're going to be back jacking up taxes again because they didn't deal with the problem that got them in there in the first place. In our case, we have a system that's 100% funded when it comes to the retirement system. We're not cutting any benefits in this proposal. We're not pulling back on what people get in terms of retirement. We're just saying, like almost everybody else in society, there should be a contribution to help offset the actual cost of paying into that system from the payroll, and there should be a reasonable expectation in terms of what we all pay in terms of health care. When we do that, I think that sends a clear message that Wisconsin has tackled the tough decisions. We're ready to go forward. We're ready to get the state working again. And when we do, again, I know that over the next 4 years, by 2015, we're going to hit our goal of creating 250,000 new jobs. And I appreciate the chance to come by and share a little bit with you. These are, challenging times. They are for everybody in the economy. You talked about it in the introduction, but I know we're going to get through because ultimately we work hard. We've got a great workforce in the state. We've got great companies, many times multi-generational, and companies and suppliers that want to continue to grow. We've got great assets. No other state in the union is surrounded by 2 Great Lakes and the greatest river in the U.S. We're filled with 15,000 inland lakes, and we're just a state that's filled with all sorts of great opportunities. We just got to get focused on getting the state working again, and that's exactly what we're up to. So I'm going to break for a minute before I tour, talk to these guys from the media so they can get their questions answered, and then I'm going to go around and see a little bit up close of the work that you do, and I appreciate you giving me the courtesy of a few minutes of your time. Thanks very much. Thanks. Good to see you. Good to see you again. All right.
Governor, the unions have said recently as today that they are willing to surrender your points on the contributions to the health insurance and the retirement plan but not their bargaining rights. Why do you feel it's necessary to virtually end all of their bargaining rights in order to balance the budget?
Well, over the past decade, we've had, on average, in the state, 15 months it's taken to get to a negotiated contract. We don't have 15 months to balance a budget. And on top of that, probably more importantly, is even if the state can reach that, we have a state budget that's going to have an impact on every local government in the state of Wisconsin, every school board, every city council, every county board, every local government in turn. And for us to have hundreds of different contracts that potentially may or may not be negotiated successfully, to me, is just unacceptable. We've got to have the tools for every local government in the state to be able to balance the changes in local aids from state government to the local government. This is the best way to do it. It allows us to move forward. And it's important to remember, because this is a frequently misstated fact in this Capitol. Civil service protections. Worker rights are protected by the civil service system in the state of Wisconsin. It's the strongest civil service system in the country. It was in place long before collective bargaining. It will still be in place after our budget repair bill passes. And so things like being hired based on merit, having just cause for discipline and discharge, all those things are in place because of the collective bargaining system. All those things are in place because of the civil service system, not because of collective bargaining. They're codified in collective bargaining, but they will not change, just as they're in place for non-unionized employees right now. So workers will still be protected. The main change for a worker after this bill passes is that everybody, me, they, management and labor alike, myself, my family, my cabinet, lawmakers will all be paying slightly more, a modest amount for pension and health care contributions. And all state workers will no longer automatically have to be in a union, and they'll get to keep that money because we're not going to automatically deduct that from their payroll. That's $500 to $600 or more, depending on the union they were in. That's money they can use to offset the higher payments for health care and for a pension contribution. To me, those are all realistic changes to be made.
What do you have to say about the speed at which this is moving through?
Well, for us, we've got a budget that comes up next Tuesday. These are issues I talked about during the campaign. I talked about right after the election. I talked about when the contracts were up in December, which people should remember. There was no interest in negotiating with me after the election when they were trying to ram through collective bargaining agreements then, when they were hopeful that the past legislature and governor would enact those before January 3rd when we all took office. I talked about the inauguration. I've talked about it 2 weeks ago at the State of the State. So nobody should be surprised about what we're doing. We've talked about it for the last 2 years. Anyone who's surprised about this has been in a coma because this has been pretty apparent out there. The key difference is, and maybe they're shocked in Madison, but I'm fulfilling yet again things I said I would do on the campaign trail.
Governor, when did you first say that you would want to end virtually all collective bargaining rights for public workers? Because most people said they didn't hear about that until Friday.
Well, the Milwaukee Press Club actually talked at great length. They used the word decertify in the coverage in November when they talked about it. We didn't say precisely that we would do that. I said I would explore every option. Several newspapers that endorsed me mentioned, in part, was my willingness to take on the unions, depending on what the option would be to balance the budget. We didn't identify a specific course of action. I laid out what my options were. In this case, the only way I can absolutely guarantee that local governments have the ability to balance the budgets and not be dependent on literally every school district, every town board, every city council, every county board having to negotiate a contract. I know as a local government official, the chances of that happening in every jurisdiction were next to impossible. And I didn't want to have local governments have some areas have contracts that would be settled for this amount, others not. In the interest of the people of the state, we need to have uniformity.
Because of your exemption of law enforcement and fire, some feel like you're diminishing the value of education. How would you respond to that?
Now, from our standpoint, I think it is pretty universal that people expect, if nothing else from their government, they expect to be safe. Fire and police protection is something that we didn't want to take any chances with. We have contingency plans that the state's had for years that we updated and refreshed since November, but we're fully prepared at the state level for whatever may happen. But when it comes to fire and police, I didn't want to take any risk, any chances with that, and so that's why we exempted that.
But as far as education, though, diminishing the value, what would you say to those people?
I have 2 kids in high school, in a public high school. I have every expectation that they're going to continue, like every other public high school in the state, to get a great education. The difference is, though, I can't have an exception in the middle of the night if my house is burning down or your house is burning down. I don't want any possibility that there would be any disruption of services. For those sorts of level 1 sorts of services, I can't have a break in that. We can make adjustments anywhere else. We have contingency plans for other parts of government. Fire and police is the one area you can't have an exception for.
So what are we looking at doing to compensate teachers and professors to keep them in the state and also attract them to the state?
Have a job. Unlike New York and California, where they're cutting billions and billions of dollars from local government schools, California is cutting $1.4 billion from the university system. They're cutting billions of dollars from education. What we're doing through these proposals will ultimately keep 5,000 to 6,000 state government employees from being laid off, and an equivalent number of 5,000 to 6,000 local government employees, including teachers, from being laid off. They look around the country. The difference is, unlike those places that are just cutting, which means they'll be laying off teachers, laying off state workers, laying off university workers, we are providing a modest alternative that will keep people working in the state of Wisconsin.
Time for 2 more questions.
Eau Claire City Council is scheduled to discuss a resolution opposing the provisions of this bill tonight. Any comment?
Yeah, I mean, that would be contrary to years of requests from the League of Municipalities, from local governments at the school board level across the board. They've asked for greater flexibility, greater control over their budgets. If they're going to counter that, then they run contrary to what local governments have been saying all across the state since I was in the legislature in the early 1990s. The bottom line is, if they want control, this gives them absolute control, or as near to absolute control, over their budgets as they can get. They've been asking for it for years. Now suddenly they're shifting. They're doing it for political purposes because it runs contrary to what most of these local governments have been saying.
Time for one more.
The busloads of people out here today, or to Madison today, and the people out here today, is this, all these protests and rallies, is this affecting anything that you've been thinking?
No, I mean, I think hey, this is America. People have every right to speak out things. I think it's great that they do. But a couple thousand public employees who are upset about the fact that they're going to have to pay a little bit more for health and a little bit more for pensions is a sharp contrast to the 5.5 million people in this state who for years, the last couple of years, have had to pay a whole lot more than most government employees have had to for health and pension benefits. So I respect our public officials. I think people in both the state and the local level have done and will continue to do a great job providing services for the public. You're going to hear a lot of mischaracterization about this. I have utmost respect for government workers. I don't think it is unrealistic, though, to balance this budget to say, instead of laying people off, we're ultimately going to ask them to pay significantly less than what most workers in this state are paying right now for pension and health care. I think, again, that if you talk to the other 5.5 million in the state, I think most people would agree that they'd gladly sign up for. I've got a brother who works as a catering manager and bartender part-time. His wife works for Sears, good blue-collar, working-class family. They've got 2 kids. He has more than $700 a month taken out of his paycheck to pay for his health care and to take a little bit and put it aside for his 401k. Guys like him all across the state would say they'd gladly take what we're offering.
All right, we need to start the tour.
Great, thanks.
You've been watching an appearance by Governor Scott Walker at McDonough Manufacturing in Eau Claire, Wisconsin on Tuesday, February 15th. Governor Walker spoke about his proposed budget repair bill. Following will be an Eau Claire City Council special meeting to discuss a resolution proposed by Councilmember Mark Olson opposing aspects of the governor's budget repair bill. It also took place on February 15th.
This meeting of the Eau Claire City Council will come to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
Councilmember Balo, Duax,
Here.
Kemp,
Here.
Kincaid, here. Klinkhammer,
Here.
Olson,
Here.
Pavelski, here. Von Hayden,
Here.
Vu, Wax,
Here.
Worthman.
Here.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. And finding a quorum, the council special session will proceed. Before I do call the agenda to our attention, I do wish to make a few opening remarks, and they will hopefully help our meeting proceed in an orderly and respectful manner. The chair agrees with the city attorney, who has found that this special meeting is in order regarding the rules of special meetings laid out in state statutes, and particularly in the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 2.08.020. And therefore, I find that the meeting is in order to proceed and do so willingly and as a duty that we have as public officers this evening. As a note to the public, I do see that there is a full chambers this evening. This is not a public hearing, and I inform you of this with all respect to your interest and your passion and really the city that we share together. But this is a legislative agenda item for the City Council. The resolution was brought by one of our members, was seconded by another member, and it is on our legislative agenda for us to discuss and debate and move forward. And while we appreciate your attendance, and it helps us to realize how strongly people feel about this item, there will not be a chance for public input. We do ask that you stay as long as you want to, that you listen respectfully, and maybe hold us accountable by your presence. And may I turn to my fellow city council members and remind us all that we have heretofore established a tradition, a deep tradition, of disagreeing with each other respectfully. We honor each other as people. We may disagree with our stances and what we maybe are going to say to each other tonight, but please don't forget, and I trust that you won't forget, that we have an honorable tradition on this council of doing the people's work with passion, but with respect for each other as people. And just a matter of some rules of the rest of the meeting. Once I introduce the agenda item, we have one agenda item this evening, I will allow the mover to speak, the seconder to speak, and then each city council member may speak for 5 minutes. You may speak the first time for 5 minutes. You may speak a second time for 3 minutes. If we find that that time is not sufficient, if we come to the end of those time periods and we find we do not have sufficient time to make our points, then the chair will consider adding additional minutes to each person's allotted time. I do understand that there may be amendments made, and we'll address those as they come up, and we are very accustomed to discussing amendments, and we know how to do that, so we'll greet that as it is laid before us. So then, to recoup, the mover will be allowed to speak, the seconder will be allowed to speak, and subsequently, council members will be allowed to speak, each for the first time for 5 minutes and for the second time for 3 minutes. And I do believe questions are in order, as is our custom. Mr. Peters does have a very brief presentation for us this evening before we begin our discussion. So we will start with that presentation, then I will ask for questions, and then we will move the item. Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, just real briefly, to make sure that everybody's on the same page, there's been a lot of media and press coverage, but perhaps to go through just a couple of the points that are in the proposed legislation and the timing. As you most likely know, Governor Walker has proposed a budget repair bill that was introduced last Friday. There were hearings today at the Joint Finance Committee, and they're proposing to take action on that down in Madison on Thursday. As far as that budget repair bill and the impact that it has, directly on us as a local government, there were really three components affecting general employees. One is that requiring a increased employee contribution into the Wisconsin retirement system, an increased health insurance contribution, and then some sweeping changes to the collective bargaining laws. The resolution that has been brought before you deals primarily with the collective bargaining laws, so I'm only going to focus on that part, and then only to just give you some bullet points of what is included in those parts of the collective bargaining law that are being proposed to change. Again, it's only for general employees. It is not for the protective service employees. The proposed change would limit collective bargaining groups to bargaining only over wages. That would be the only topic that they would be able to bargain. Wage increases would be limited to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Agreements could not be more than 1 year. There would no longer be interest arbitration. I believe you're all familiar with the binding arbitration interest process that we've traditionally used. No longer would the employer be allowed to collect the union dues through a payroll deduction. Employees would not be required to pay a fair share or towards the union dues if they didn't want to. And there would also be a requirement for an annual recertification vote of the union each year. I guess that's redundant. An annual would be each year. The resolution before you, there's a lot to it, but essentially it is asking the legislature to delete the provisions of the repair bill that are covered here on these bullets.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Questions are in order. Any questions? Councilmember Duex.
In this resolution, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, we just received late this afternoon for the first time, there is wording on the second page that it goes on to say that the City Council requests the legislature delete the provisions of the fiscal repair bill currently being considered under special session SB 11. And it said, including the sections of the proposed legislation related to represented employee classification. I wonder if you could explain that term. Prohibited subjects of bargaining, I think you've hit a couple of those. Annual bargaining unit certification requirements, and maybe you could kind of expand on that a little bit. The union dues provisions, I think I understand that. Changes to interest arbitration under MERA, and limitations on the terms of a labor agreement. I assume you meant the 1 year, but maybe if you just expand on those, it would help digest this a little bit.
Sure. Going through each of those points, the legislation, the first one, was pertaining to
proposed legislation.
The employee classification. The employee classification really is their definition of the general employee. When we talk about it only applies to general employees, they're talking about how they're going to divide the protective service employees and who would be covered by the law. So, and there's a whole fairly lengthy provision that goes through defining the difference between a general employee and a protective service employee. But in my understanding, in simplistic terms, essentially the employees that have a protective service status under the Wisconsin retirement system that are either police, fire, or a state patrol would not be impacted by these changes. All other employees would be.
Does that directly relate to municipal employees or just state employees?
That's all employees that are within the WRS system, so that would be all public employees in the state of Wisconsin. So that would be cities, counties, villages, tech schools, university, so on and so forth. The prohibitive subjects of bargaining, again, essentially means that the only thing that could be bargained would be wages. Every other topic of hours and working conditions and those types of things would no longer be subject to collective bargaining. The annual bargaining unit clarification requirements would require the WERC once a year to facilitate a vote, and 51% of the members of the union each year would have to vote to stay continued affiliated, to have a continued affiliation with that bargaining unit. The union dues provision, again, that is a provision. Currently, union dues are taken from as a deduction from a payroll. This is, it's a payroll deduction, and the employer would be prohibited from taking union dues as a union or as a payroll deduction. The changes in the interest arbitration, essentially, there would no longer be interest arbitration. And MURA is the Municipal Employer Relations Act. There's two acts. There's SELRA, which is the State Employment Labor Relations Act, and there's the Municipal Employer Relation Act. And the municipal ones for everybody but the state employees, and of course the State State Employment Relation Act is for the state employees. And so, what they're saying is under MURA, there would no longer be interest arbitration. There would still be mediation options, but again, would only be on issues of wages that were limited to CPI. And then finally, the last term there is the term of the agreement. You would not be allowed to have a labor agreement that was more than 1 year in length.
Could you define interest arbitration just for the benefit of everybody probably listening?
Currently, the 11170 or the MURA law that governs general employees provides for what's known as interest arbitration. Interest arbitration is a process that is intended to bring the parties closer together. Each party, the union and management presents wage and benefit packages, hopefully coming closer together. If at some point there's an impasse and there can't be an agreement, that goes to mediation. After the mediation, then it gets submitted to an arbitrator. The arbitrator will listen to the arguments, and there's a series of criteria that the arbitrator is supposed to evaluate, and the arbitrator then picks one or the other. It's not item by item, but it's total package. One party wins, one party loses, and the arbitrator selects one package, which then must be implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Questions by Councilmember Ron?
Just to follow up on the mediation arbitration, you said it'd still be subject to mediation.
Yes.
But would if interest arbitration is out, then is it just mediation between the parties with nobody making a final decision, or how does that work?
That's my understanding of it. And again, I probably should have qualified all of my comments. I mean, this is a 140-some page bill. We're trying to digest it, and a lot of people are trying to digest it. So this is just my understanding of the limitations that are there now. But yes, my understanding is that it would provide for mediation, but not a binding arbitration process.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kemp.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Peters, for your presentation. I have two questions. The first question is there any change? Is there any change in the law with regards to the requirements for any union to negotiate on behalf of the entire bargaining units? That was the sort of deal that was cut in the past with regards to fair share. Does this still require a union to negotiate on behalf of the entire bargaining unit?
I'm probably a little weak on that answer, but I believe the bargaining unit would still be required to bargain on behalf of the entire group, even though the fair share is not being paid.
So this would set up an incentive then for individuals to not pay union dues but yet receive benefits.
That would be my understanding of it at this point, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Did you have a second question?
Yes, I did, but I can't recall.
Okay.
Councilmember Whitman.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Peters, for your explanations tonight. You might have already covered it, and I apologize. But in terms of the ability for grievances or to bring a grievance, is that addressed under this law as well?
Actually, there's debate over what the language means in terms of grievance. It appears to still provide for a grievance arbitration, but it also appears that the grievance arbitration might only apply to the wage. And so, because generally a grievance arbitration deals with a grievance that you violated something, and if the bargaining agreement is only wages, there's really nothing else you could be violating or allegedly not implementing properly than the wage. So, but there's considerable discussion is really about that provision right now and what it means or what it doesn't mean.
I have a follow-up question. What percent, off the top of your head, of current grievances are around wages? If you could guess.
Well, very few, because unless an employee says, I'm supposed to be paying $10 an hour and you're paying me $9 an hour, and we disagree over that, very, very rarely is there a grievance on wages, because that's handled through the interest arbitration process.
So almost
or the
all
bargaining
grievances
process.
are not wage related?
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Kemp, remembered your question?
Yes, thank you, Madam President, for your indulgence. Yes, my second question was regarding the annual certification requirements and the single year term limit on a contract. Would that mean that the city would be required to come back to contract negotiations with any remaining labor unions on an annual basis?
Any general employee unions, yes.
Okay. Just for the record, how often do we generally negotiate with labor? What contractual period do we generally?
Usually we've gone 2, sometimes 3-year periods. Occasionally a 1-year period, but it's usually 2-year periods.
So this would require us to double or perhaps even more increase the quantity of time, or I should say the quantity of labor negotiations that we engage.
Times that we revisit the wage rates, yes, we would be doing that on roughly twice as often.
Thank you as much.
Welcome.
We're still in the question period. I'll take Councilmember Podolsky and then get to Councilmember Von Hayden.
According to that, then he would require, what's being proposed is the requirement to negotiate 1-year agreements, which I find pretty time consuming if in fact some of these contracts are typically 2-3 years.
Yeah, typically it's 2 or 3 years. You're right, it is something that as staff and as a council we would have to revisit every year. The other side to that, if you're only talking about one item. And it would just be the wage, which is constrained to the cost of living.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Councilmember Von Hayden.
This might be a little bit out of the realm, but question that I have here is on the protective services area. Are all of the rules that are currently in effect in the protective service area, such as the maintenance of services, in other words, that our budget 1 year compared to the next year must be maintained at a certain level, are those still intact, or did they give us some ability within the city to make adjustments that would appropriately fix the needed changes?
We will learn that next week. I mean, this is only the budget repair bill that takes the state through the June 30th. The biennium budget is due to come out next week on the 22nd, and any constraints relative to our ability to raise taxes, the maintenance of standard issue that you speak of with police and fire, or shared revenue impacts, we will expect to be hearing that next week.
Thank you.
Lots of good questions. Councilmember Watts.
Thank you, Madam President. So in essence, what this does is it puts together a 2-tiered system. One system under one rate of pay and bargaining position, bargaining power. And the other system essentially at the mercy of the others. I mean, isn't there a point where the comparatives between the two meet? I mean, if the general employees are making one level, soon won't there be arguments about what's a fair wage for the fire department and the police the safety officers as well. Is there a comparative issue?
Yes and no. I mean, from a practical standpoint, internally, within an organization, you'll have that type of comparison going on. From a practical standpoint of determining wages, historically, the police and fire don't have private sector comparables per se. Most of the other general employees, or I shouldn't say most, many of the general employee wages have at least some comparable sector or private sector comparables that you can do with to look at. But you're right. It will set up a two-tiered system of people that are working under one system of rules and dispute resolution and way of changing benefits and wages with the other group, and they will be starkly contrasted. Mm-hmm.
Further questions? Councilmember Drex?
Perhaps this is a question that's maybe beyond your pay grade, as they say, but I'm trying to understand why all these change. I think I understand part of the reason why some of the changes are being put into this package now because of the current fiscal year ends June 30th and there's a need to balance the budget and all that. But some of these are not financially related and sounds like something that might have been in a biennial budget bill, if at all. In other words, some comprehensive reforms. This was not really anticipated, was it? This length. I mean, I understand some things going into a budget repair bill because you have to repair the budget, but some of this sounds like long-term things that might have been expected in the biennial next budget, where it would be played out over a series of months and lots of hearings and so forth.
If your question is, am I personally or were we surprised by the breadth and depth of this proposal in a repair bill, the answer would be yes. I certainly cannot speak to motive or intent or those types of things.
I wasn't trying to put you in that position, but I wondered if that was, if I missed something. I mean, I don't think any of us like surprises. Well, except nice surprises.
Well, as I said before, these are very sweeping changes that will have, big impacts long term. And as I showed in the calendar, it's a very, very tight schedule. I mean, it was introduced last Friday, and they expect to act on it this Thursday.
Councilmember Olson.
I just have one more question, Mr. Peters. When, then it's kind of a follow-up on Councilman Locke's question on when you go to mediation and arbitration. Isn't it correct that the mediator or arbitrator weighs heavily on the internal comparables of a city, other union groups when comparing one contract to another?
Yes, and yes, one of the weights that they use is internal comparables, and so maybe I missed your question, Councilmember Walks, or understanding it, and so under our current system where our general employees are in the binding arbitration process, as are the protective, those are comparables that the arbitrators use. Arbitrators do not typically use unrepresented groups as comparables. So, to the extent that they're under different rules, I don't believe that the arbitrators would give those the same weight as comparable that they would have when everybody was operating on the same playing field.
We hope
yes.
that they wouldn't, but
right.
It's untested. Yeah.
It's very untested. You're welcome.
Questions? I see no further questions, and thank you again, Mr. Peters.
Thank you.
For helping us introduce this topic. Seeing no further questions by council, the chair introduces item 1 on our agenda, which is a resolution opposing provisions of the budget adjustment bill proposed by Governor Walker. The item is moved by Councilmember Olson and seconded by Councilmember Worthman. Councilmember Olson, do you wish to speak to your resolution?
I want to apologize to the rest of my council members for having such short time for you to get a chance to digest this, but it was something that, as Mr. Peters showed us, is very rapidly coming through, and action needs to be taken if we were going to take any action. I would have definitely preferred to be able to have this on our agenda next week in a normal session where we would have had weekend to go through and review this. But I really have a strong opinion on taking away the rights of the public employees' right to collectively bargain. This is something that I benefited from my whole career as a firefighter, and it makes an impact not only to the public employees, but also to the community and the city. When the two parties sit down at the table and talk, there's not always, it's not always one-sided. It's not always a disadvantage to the city, or it's not always a disadvantage to the employee. It's where the two groups actually get to meet and discuss problems, not only in the workplace, but in the community, and to try finding solutions to help solve that. And I think by stripping away those rights of the public employees to be able to sit down with the employer and talk about these issues and work them out, we've seen in our own city the employees work with the city on helping keep our budget in line so we can have a balanced budget each year, taking concessions, making changes in health insurance, and working on ways to improve things and the way the city functions. Our focus groups that we have come up with ways to save the city money. These are all part of basically a negotiation, working together. And I really hate to see it get stripped away in this budget repair bill, where it's not going to repair, this collective bargaining part isn't going to, excuse me, save any money in the budget. Let's sit down, negotiate a contract. Yes, everyone knows there's probably going to have to be some concessions, but don't take away the right to bargain from the public employees. We need them. They're vital to our community. They're vital to the economy of our community. And this is why I felt it was so important to bring this forward, and I hope that you can all understand why there's such an urgency to send this message to Madison that we do not feel this is the right thing to put in to the budget adjustment bill to take away all collective bargaining from our public employees.
Thank you, Councilmember Olson. And Councilmember Worthman, your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. And I want to just say thank you to Councilmember Olson for bringing this forward and for allowing me to work as a co-author on this legislation tonight. And I too, I guess, am somewhat apologetic for the fact that we are meeting on a short notice. But as Mr. Peters relayed earlier, this is certainly fast-tracked, and it seemed appropriate. I believe I asked our city manager, Mr. Huggins, earlier tonight about the last time that the city of Eau Claire actually held a special session, and he said that in the history, they couldn't find any time that it had ever happened. And I think that says a lot about this issue. And when I showed up tonight, I saw people packed in, even in the lobby. I don't know how many people are out there, but it's probably quite a number. From my time on council, I have never seen an issue with this sort of outpouring of public support. And I think that says a lot on a Tuesday night with less than 24, well, I guess exactly 24 hours of notice about this meeting. This is the response. And I think just that in itself, let alone the issue that we're about to debate and the resolution we're about to vote on, I think says a lot about what this issue means to our community and how it is, in fact, completely wrong and going down the wrong road. I think it is worth pointing out, oftentimes we talk about sort of generalities, but I think it is worth pointing out that this bill has real fiscal, financial consequences for people in our community. And you know, there's a provision in the resolution we're considering tonight that actually talks about the fact that public employees, of which there are over 6,000 just in Eau Claire, in the county of Eau Claire, would be losing about $3,500, potentially more dollars out of pocket in all the ways that this collective bargaining, the implications for collective bargaining would have. And when that is added up in terms of the fiscal impact for our county, that amounts to over $21 million that in fact will not be coming to the hardworking men and women of our county and of our city, which in turn will not be going into Main Street, will not be going to paying bills, will not be going to buying clothing for kids, will not be going to buying food. And $21 million impact just for our region, let alone the rest of the state, is extremely detrimental, I think, by all accounts. You know, some people have asked, well, you know, we do need to fill the budget deficit. I actually just did a little bit of research earlier today to see, are there other areas, in fact, that we could be focusing on in our state that we've sort of forgotten about? And one area that I think is sometimes left by the wayside when we talk about, you know, where is it that we're going to make cuts, and where is it that we need to ask for people to pay more of their fair share? And I found that actually since 1980, the amount of corporate tax that has been raised.
Councilmember Whitman,
certainly.
I do have to call a point of order and ask you to restrain your remarks to the resolution before us and the provisions stated there.
Certainly, I will do. In any case, I feel strongly, as I believe other council members and as Councilmember Olson does, that balancing the budget on the backs of hardworking public employees in our city and county is not the right way to go. And you know, as someone who has been a part of both sides of the negotiating table, I served actively in OPEIU a few years ago, and I've also sat in as a city council member in the bargaining room. What takes place there is, as Councilmember Olson said, a place of debate, a place of respect, and even though there are grave differences sometimes at the table, both sides respect and admire the other side. What we're seeing from Governor Walker with this proposal is anything but respect, and instead of listening and debating, this is, in my opinion, simply dictating for concessions to be made. I would like to urge all of my fellow council members to support this, and again, I think it's vitally important that our area legislators, both in the State Assembly and the State Senate, as well as our governor, listen to the conversation here tonight, to our vote, and most of all, to the public outpouring of support that we are seeing. Thank you.
And thank you, Councilmember. Even though I know the sentiments run deep, it's imperative that we all listen and act respectfully towards each other this evening. And clapping and booing or hissing or shouting will just simply not be allowed. And I ask you, I plead with you to adhere to that. It's for the benefit of all of us. Then debate is now open amongst all of us. I would remind you of our 5-minute time limit, and the city clerk, I forgot your name, of course, the city clerk will use the green, yellow, red light. Ms. Austin. Done. Yeah. Okay. I think I saw Councilmember Kemp's light on first. Councilmember Kemp, your 5 minutes begins.
Thank you, Madam President.
And by the way, you don't have to take all 5 minutes.
I'll do my best. But then again, once you let a professor start talking.
That's right.
Well, again, I also thank all my fellow city councilmen as well as all the members of the public and the media that are here this evening on what is relatively short notice. Of course, is the matter is very timely. This bill was launched on us Friday afternoon and is expected to be up for vote by Thursday afternoon. So here we are. I sit here as a member of City Council, although I have a variety of interests in the community. Our job here on City Council, as I see it, is to ensure that the citizens of the city receive the highest quality of public services at the lowest possible cost. That is, that we provide city services in the most efficient manner possible. I find myself sympathetic with this resolution, and I am speaking in favor of it this evening, because as I see it, this bill helps us to accomplish neither of those, at least the portion of this repair bill to which the resolution addresses. It neither helps us to improve the quality of city services. Indeed, many of those city services are conducted by the very employees that this bill addresses. To ensure the highest quality city services, we must provide a reasonable wage. This does everything to attack those reasonable wages. It does all that it can to reduce the essentially bargaining power of our workers. It makes it more difficult for us to provide that high quality of service. Moreover, I think it affects the respectful set of conditions that have long lasted between the city council, and its city employees. We have on many, many occasions achieved results jointly that have benefited the city to a great degree. I fear that if this budget repair bill passes, as it has been written, that it will very seriously do damage to that relationship. On the cost side, I see very little in this bill that helps us to achieve lower costs. Indeed, as I understand it, this will require us to go to the bargaining table with our various employee groups annually. Currently, we go to the table with them either every other year or even every third year. It's not clear to me how going to the table with our bargaining units or our bargaining groups every year helps us to save costs. It doesn't seem clear to me how this helps us to achieve lower cost municipal governance, which I find very curious because indeed, of course, the bill is titled Budget Adjustment Bill, which implies that there are issues with the current budget. Now, having spent a number of years in the municipal budget process, we're all aware that there is a serious crisis, not only at many of the local levels here across the state, but the state itself. I do not question that crisis. Indeed, if this bill were only addressing that crisis, I don't think I would see any issue with it. In fact, I would applaud it if it were to achieve those problems or achieve solutions to those problems in an effective manner. I would hope to see some sort of decoupling of many of the collective bargaining aspects of this bill from the financial aspects of the bill. I would like to see a budget repair bill that repairs the budget. I think this bill does far more than that. We at the local level didn't ask to have our employees stripped of their collective bargaining rights. Yet here we are, having it imposed upon us. I hope that if we're able to pass this resolution, which I hope all of you will join me in supporting, that it will send a message up to the state. Let's get our budget in order. We've got a problem, let's fix the problems. If we need to cut, let's cut. Let's be prudent where we're going to cut. But let's not make broad, sweeping policy decisions within a 7-day period from Friday afternoon releasing a budget repair bill and potentially passing it on the governor's desk less than 7 days later. Major changes to Wisconsin law, which have stood for decades, in 1 week. 1 week. We heard about how other bills were being rammed down our throats. This bill is being rammed down everybody's throat. Thank you.
Thank you, and we would remind council members again and again to speak to the resolution before us and the provisions that Councilmember Watts, your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. With just a little freeway, I'd like to just talk, I'm an attorney, and I'd like to talk about the procedural aspects of what has gone on here. Councilman Worthman and Councilman Olson begged apology to us for being brought here on Tuesday night. Well, this is a pattern that's been going on. It's 3 weeks ago, nursing home reports of investigative authorities investigating incidents at nursing homes for the first time ever became inadmissible, and the victim can't even see it. 80-page bill passed in a week before anyone could find out what's going on. Another bill, this is all in January. We changed evidence, expert witness testimony evidence, against the recommendations of the judges of this state, against the recommendations of the Wisconsin Bar Association and the Wisconsin Association for Justice. 7 days this is done before people know what's going on. So here we are tonight looking at a bill that's going to change decades of law in this state. The structure of unions, it's critical for our community. In this city, we've had almost uniformly a wonderful relationship with unions. We've gotten along with them. We've been able to sit down at the same table and work things out so that people can have a meaningful salary and a meaningful life. And the money they earn can go back into our community. I join Councilman Kemp when he says, you know, here, this is being imposed on us. We never asked for this. We've had a good relationship. We value our workers in this town. I speak in favor of this resolution.
Thank you, Councilmember Watts. Councilmember Booth.
Well, I would like to say thank you for all the citizens that are here to support this resolution. I think it doesn't make sense to take away the public employer bargaining, so it doesn't make sense to me. I have been in the council almost 8 years, and like a council, Dana said that we do not have any problem. So I think that doesn't make sense to take away the public collective bargaining, so we need to send this message to Madison. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Booth. Other statements, discussion. Councilmember Von Hayden.
Yeah. Many of the people that were down in Madison today were commenting that they know some concessions have to be made on financial, and I realize this is not financial, but that's just kind of an addressing to it, that those things are something that could be handled in a proper bargaining session. And yet, here we have a scenario where we're saying, let's take away the rights to bargain. I've had the opportunity to be on the bargaining committee for the city with the unions for the past 7, 8, 9, 10 years or whatever it is, a number of years, and it's always been a positive type of relationship. We've been able to go back and forth and discuss issues, come up with compromises, and I think that's what it's all about. The one item that was in there that I agree that should come out was interest arbitration, because what this did was cause a problem where it prevented us from managing our affairs. And what we here, as Councilmember Kemp was saying, let's let the city manage their affairs and keep the state out of it. We have a good system that works here. The state is now trying to dictate to us, and the way of doing it is totally inappropriate. You can't have a 147-page bill and expect somebody to understand it in 7 days. We know the people in Madison that'll be voting on this have no idea what's in there. Let's not let that happen. In fact, the thing that's happening with this, that's the worst part of it, is the intent here is to pit employee against employee. It's not the intent to reduce costs. It's an intent to create something within the working confines, which right now we have positive relationships between all our unions. What would happen here in the city would be, they say, well, we can't go after protective services because if there was a fire, they wouldn't show up. Quote Governor Walker's statement today on TV. Now, but my statement to that in response is, we can't get the police and fire to the place if we don't have the other employees doing their jobs. We need them to clear the streets. One of the things that happened here, even this year, during the big snowstorm, what did we do? We assigned a snowplow with the fire department so we could get the emergency vehicles out. Will that happen if we don't have cooperations between the units? Who knows? But that's what I'm saying. Let's send a message to Madison. We need to come up with a bill that says let's work together, not fight over every little issue. We need cooperation, not discooperation. Let the cities manage their own business, and Madison stay in Madison.
Other discussion? Other discussion? Councilmember Klinkhammer.
I kind of thought I'd have more time to get my thoughts in order, but I'll step in here at the risk of being stoned when I leave, I guess. But
Not in my chamber. So.
Okay. I know that if you speak for even-handed treatment of Muslims in the Middle East, you risk being branded as being anti-Semitic. I support our employees. I support our taxpayers as well. Do I agree with everything in this adjustment bill? No. Do I think that it's going to get passed the way it's written? No. I've always contended that we need to have a better dialogue with our employee groups, not just at contract renewal time. We need to understand their concerns. We need to understand their fears as a city council. But they need to understand the challenges of our budget too, and the responsibilities that they play and the role that they play in the services that they provide to our citizens. We need to protect their jobs. And right now, the way it's situated or the way it's organized, if we can't meet the budget, the only alternative is to lay people off. Is that protecting them? I say no. We need to have, I agree with many of the comments that have been made, that we do enjoy a very positive relationship with our union. And I do agree that they have a right to bargain in good faith. But in my experience with many of the issues, they have to have not only the right to bargain in good faith, but they have to bargain in good faith, as we do. To illustrate my point, county pays $13.12 an hour for each of their employees for health insurance. Okay. The employee pays $1.09 of that. Okay. somewhere there has to be a more of an element of fairness. Now, does this, and over the years, you talk about the decades of the process that has been built up in Wisconsin, has pulled the pendulum so far to that direction that the city has very little latitude to bargain in good faith. We have no room to bargain. We have no room, basically. Comments have been made that issues have been resolved amicably, and that there is progress made, concessions made. Well, I have to say that in my experience, it's been kind of one-sided. There's very little increase in the share of the health insurance that's being paid by the employees. The fact that our employees participated in the health assessment and they cooperated in the change in insurance is very admirable, and I appreciate them. There's no bigger supporter of our employees than I am. But I also, as I said, equally support our taxpayers. And in the long run, we have to balance both of their concerns, the need and the right that they have to expect quality services with a full complement of staff in all departments. Our voters made some major changes in both houses of the state legislature. They made a change in the governors. Okay. Does this legislation jerk the pendulum too far the other direction? Absolutely. But the bell needed to be sounded. Okay. If we are going to bargain in good faith, and
Councilmember Klinkhammer, the chair notes that your 5 minutes are up.
I will concede.
In the interest of fairness. Councilmember Pivesky.
Well,
voice?
Yes. Thank you. As you know, and people we've all said, we have this short time in terms of preparing for this. But I do think it's important to recognize, that Wisconsin certainly has led the way as far as collective bargaining since 1936. And so it has a good history of bargaining. And I will say that, however, when you look at the list, whether it was the employee contributions to the retirement fund in the employee, but the biggest area in collective bargaining with that, it just seems to me that it's so limiting. If in fact the only thing you can work with is wages and general employees, those are two factors that you have to consider with this budget repair bill. Okay, I have heard, I think I read it in the paper or someplace. I know, and it kind of addresses Councilman Dueck's comment earlier about the budget repair bill as compared to the biennial budget. And I had read somewhere that this was to save the state $30 million. And yet it alludes to the next biennium as $300 million. So it doesn't end here. My gut feeling would be, it would be continued within the constraints of that next budget too, only we don't know quite what that would look like either. And I think, as we look at, we're all faced with budget crisis. The state has a real concern, but so do we. And when I think about the recession has created the need to restrain pay and benefits, but that has been accomplished by existing rules. It seems so drastic to me to have to change these rules such as that, and when you're limited to that, I don't know if you would accomplish what you really intend to accomplish. So I thought the system really works. Radically changing it will take us back to the days of municipal and state labor strikes and strikes with disruptions to basic services. That was one of the concerns why some of this stuff came into play historically, to prevent that from happening, because we need to provide those services. So that's important to us. I too have had the opportunity to be at that bargaining table, not only here, but elsewhere as well. And what really makes that effective is if in fact you have that total package. If in fact you have wiggle room. You can't be constrained to one item and expect to be, it would be a difficult bargaining session to limit it just to wages, when you might be concerned about so many other things, whether it be benefits or work rules or anything. So I think we've had a system that works. Certainly we are proud of our employees here. I can appreciate the fact that we really need to be prudent. We need to find answers to these budget crises, both locally and at a state level. But I think we can approach it a little bit differently. I wish this just seems so drastic in the short amount of time, and the questions have been unanswered, as far as how successfully. I think the question needs to be asked. I think we all need to be share some in terms of developing the right solution. It's all of ours, and we want to provide those basic services for our city, and we want to do it in a cost and efficient manner. And so that's part of what this process is all about, and to assure that that process still exists. To change it so radically is really a tough way to go. So I certainly support that. Only I know President Kincaid was saying that there might be some revisions within the constraints of this resolution, that we might be taking some items up differently, that we perhaps. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Podolsky. Councilmember Drix, the last 5 minutes.
I'm glad to hear my other colleagues weigh in on this very complex issue. I'll have to admit that when I first heard about this today, we did not get the customary and legally required 24 hours notice. This became one of those first-time experiences for me of going with a 2-hour notice. The statute actually says that unless there has to be good cause for such notice being impossible or impractical. I'm not here to debate that. There were certainly some unusual circumstances here with the fast action in Madison. But it does make it difficult for us. Just like the legislature is going to be forced to rush to judgment, tonight we're going to have to make a quick decision and move on. For the practical reason is we won't have anything to say if we wait too long. So, given those constraints, I look back a year ago, and I remember when President Obama was proposing national health insurance, the statements were made, hey, the election's over, it's time to just get the job done, let's run it through fast. And so a very large bill was passed very quickly. Many people were upset. I confess I was kind of upset because we didn't hear the deliberation and the work on details that were necessary to anybody who's been involved in legislation, myself included. Similarly, we've heard Governor Walker 1 year later say, well, the election's over, you knew what I was going to do, and I'm doing it, so here we go. I'm not any happier about that. I believe in the legislative process to take deliberate action. That is, you deliberate, you consider, you amend, you debate, you fix, you fuss, you make little amendments. Anybody who's worked in this council knows that I've been an amender many times on things to try to come up with a better crafted product. I don't take the recipe out of the book. I like to kind of add a little salt and pepper and a little seasoning once in a while. So it is with this resolution. I see some areas where we can find some improvement. But let me just say this. I think we've had good labor relations in Eau Claire, and I don't think we need any radical change in Madison that is going to disrupt that, particularly since this is supposed to be a budget repair bill, and it's supposed to repair the budget that ends fiscal year ending June 30th. Some of these changes, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, go far beyond the immediacy of the moment and deal with long-term issues that maybe some feel need to be rectified. I won't kid you by saying I agree with everything the way the labor laws are now. There are some things I think could be adjusted, but they should be considered on a separate basis. They should be sent to legislative committees. They should be deliberated. They should have markups, changes, come back, go to another committee, go through the legislative process. You know what they say about legislation, it's not always pretty how it's made. Those who like good laws and good sausage shouldn't watch the making of either. That's one admonition. Another one is haste makes waste. I'm afraid I've had ample time to talk in our household about it. My wife serves on the Eau Claire Area District School Board, and we've had a chance to process this as it affects teachers, and I process it as it affects our city employees. Maybe I can speak for my wife because we've in agreement that we respect the fact that we need to make some fiscal adjustments, but we're very concerned about the speed with which we're doing it and the comprehensiveness of this proposal. It goes far beyond the immediate and deals with long-term issues that need separate consideration. To that end, I have a suggestion for an improvement to this that might help speak to that. I don't know if you can put the resolution up on the screen for our visitors, but if you could, on the second page, you will see what I'm referring to. I think everyone can see the TV screen when we get this up.
I don't have it in very large print for you, though.
Oh, okay, well, there we go. That'll do it. Could you just, okay.
There we go.
If you look in that first paragraph, it ends with, and limitations on the terms of a labor agreement. I would add the words, and, where it says and, continue with the following words. That said items be given separate consideration with public hearings, legislative committee markup, and deliberation in each house of the legislature. So in other words, if you read that whole thing together, it refers to the parts of the bill that deal with collective bargaining and employment relations that would prohibit public employee collective bargaining, including, and it lists several items, and basically saying that said items be given separate consideration with public hearings. So in other words, it's not only saying don't do this, but here's how you should deal with it. Deal with it in a fair way that respects everyone's ability to participate in a major possible change in state law. So I'm going to offer that as an amendment, and if it's a friendly amendment, I'll ask the sponsors of this resolution. If not, I'll just have us vote on it. But I would propose that, amend it, add that language.
Can we just review your amendment, please?
Sure.
I have, and after the last and, the words, that said items be given separate consideration, comma, with public hearings. I think you had a few more words.
Legislative committee markup and deliberation in each house of the legislature.
Markup and deliberation in each house
of the legislature. The standard process, in other words.
Are you okay with that, Madam City Clerk? The mover asks friendly. Does the...
I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
Accepted by the friendly, and the seconder?
I'll second.
The amendment is accepted as a friendly, but it does bear discussion. Is there discussion on the friendly amendment? The intention is well known and well understood then. Further discussion, my council members. You each have had your 5 minutes in the spotlight. Now, as agreed upon, the other round would consider a 3-minute constraint. Councilmember Kemp.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the audience for your indulgence of my second round of ramblings, no doubt. I'll just keep it very brief and quick. There's been some discussion about the sort of give and take of the bargaining process and the status of employee compensation in the city versus other areas. I would just make a note that the number of city employees that the city operates with today in 2011 is smaller than it was in 1980, 31 years ago. In those 31 years, the city has grown significantly. The number of streets have increased significantly. The number of households that need and businesses that require fire protection have increased significantly. The miles of sewer and other facilities that require constant maintenance have increased significantly. The number of citizens and businesses that require protection from police forces has increased significantly. So in that 31 years, we've seen a tremendous improvement in the productivity of those employees. And with that, I can find further reason to support this resolution. I think we've asked a diminishing number of people in a period of diminishing resources to continue to do an exceptional job for the citizens of the city, and they have regularly stepped up and done it. Thank you.
And thank you, Councilmember Kim. Further discussion? Councilmember Whitman.
Thank you, Madam President. And if I could follow up from my colleague, Councilmember Kemp, to think about the last 30 years. And, you know, one of the things that I think this comes down to, and I would like to speak to all public employees in our city, not just those that are under the city payroll, but in fact all of those constituents who are public employees who reside in our city. You know, I was fortunate enough to attend a meeting last night at South Middle School, where in fact teachers, who I think make up a good number of those of you in the crowd here today, talked about what this means for our future and what this means for our kids. And as Councilmember Kemp put it, really when we think about building our future and we think about the strength of our community, I think we must look to public employees and the contribution that they provide. As I took a walk this afternoon and thought about my remarks tonight, I recalled my civics teacher in high school who was exactly the opposite end of the spectrum politically from me, but was someone who inspired me in a way that I'll always be thankful for. To get involved in the community, to care about civic duty and those sorts of things. And we disagreed on almost everything, but he really had a way of inspiring the kids he taught. And I think about that, and I think about what this bill does. And all indications, it goes against that. It goes against what I think we hold true in terms of looking toward the future, looking toward infrastructure, building our roads, teaching our kids, keeping our community safe. And you know, I also want to say that I think this is a matter of priorities. It's one thing to balance the budget, but in 1980, 10% of our state's budget was paid by corporate taxes, and then through loopholes and flat taxes, now it only makes up 5% of our overall state budget. Now, that alone, if we were to go back to 1980 levels, or 31 years ago, as Councilmember Kemp pointed out, if we were to go back to 1980 levels in terms of what massive corporations pay toward our state revenue, we wouldn't have to even be considering this. And we could have even better pay for our teachers and for all of those public employees. So I think this is a matter of priorities and fairness. And we talk about balancing the budget, let's look elsewhere.
Thank you, Councilmember Riffin. Further discussion? Councilmember Wilson.
Thank you. I want to just comment on Councilman Klinkhammer's talk, and I do understand that the employees of the city are respected by you. You respect the service they give the city, and that you do believe that they deserve to be treated fairly. No questions from the actions I see on the council from you that that's true. And I agree with you that yes, there is very little wiggle room left in the budget when we start negotiating. But I do believe that the employees understand that when times are tough, concessions have to be made. The concessions that this repair bill is asking for are monetary. They're asking you to give up your rights, your working conditions. That's not what we want in a repair bill. What we want in a repair bill, like many of the other council members have stated, is to repair the budget. Let's eliminate all these non-budget items out of this repair bill, repair the budget, but still keep our public employees having rights.
Thank you, Councilmember Olson. Any further discussion? Councilmember Dwix.
I just wanted to add my support to Councilmember Olson's statement. I think we need to keep a repair bill a budget repair bill just as such, and to render those legislative changes that are policy in nature into the standard process. More importantly, I want to reflect on something that some have commented on, and that's how we do employment relations in Eau Claire. I think we have had that good working relationship, maybe not so much years ago, but in recent years, we have developed that. Part of it is from our ability, even as council members, to meet face-to-face with labor leaders, some of whom are here in this room. We've been able to understand firsthand what the problems are, to try to get our own perspective on those things, and thus to have mature discussions with people to say, look, we can't go on this way with this. How can we fix it? And we've had some great ideas advanced, some that are still yet to be worked out. But the point is, we've been able to be masters of our own future without having to have it laid out in a formula in Madison. I read with some disappointment when Governor Walker said there was nothing for him to meet with Marty Beal on, President of, Executive Director, I believe is the title of Local 24 Wisconsin State Employees Union. Some 20 years ago, I had the privilege of meeting Marty for the first time. I was told he could help me in my job in state government at that time. I was a little intimidated by him. He's even bigger than I am. And when I met him for the first time, he let me know that he was going to match me face to face, nose to nose, and he did. But I'll tell you, those negotiations or discussions we held were a valuable learning experience for me to solve some labor issues we had. And we learned that we could work together. And I've felt that lesson to this day, and that I know that when we meet together with our labor leaders here, there's nothing much we can't solve if we come in with the right attitude. And so it's with that spirit that I offered the amendment I did, and that's why I will support this in the spirit it is. And also I know that we have some other problems with respect to big issues on our plate, not just for the city of Eau Claire, not just for Eau Claire County, but for the school district, and some of you are teachers. We need to move ahead and solve these. If we can't do it locally, we need to depend on the state to help us with the financing, but we both have to work on our respective jobs. If the state would let us do our job and they would do their job, I think we'd all be better served. Thank you.
Councilmember Van Hayden.
Just briefly, we all know that some financial concessions will have to be made, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about our employees and what it means to them, not just financially, but over the years we've been asking more and more from our employees with less and less employees available. We're putting pressure on them to do their work. Now we want to turn around and say to them, well, you don't count. You don't even have bargaining rights anymore. You can't talk to anybody. Just take it, shut up, and do your job. And that's not the way to deal with people. We have to give them the opportunity to have their input with their work rights, all of the other things that go with it, so we can have their input, so we can come up with the best deal, so that it isn't that we need just to have a happy workforce. Without a happy workforce, we will not be able to provide the necessary services to the citizens of Eau Claire to make Eau Claire the great city that it is. It is one of the greatest cities, and let's keep it that way by keeping a strong and positive workforce within the city.
And thank you, Councilmember Von Hayden. Any further discussion? I believe not. Seeing Councilmember Klinkhammer.
My wife is a retired teacher, so if you think this discussion is interesting, you should have heard some of them. I came in here so adamantly opposed to this resolution, and we've had so little time to digest it that I do agree that it would be wrong to deprive our employees of the right to bargain in good faith. And if, I guess, in some respects, I do think that the impact of bringing this forward has been made. Whether it's passed or not, I mean, that dialogue has to improve, and progress is going to have to be made. No one wants stuff crammed down their throat and say you have to do something, because we do have, I think, a laudable heritage within the city and our employee groups of bargaining in good faith. We just have to continue that and further improve that. Because concessions are going to have to be made. But charts that were usually in the back of the room there that showed the expenses going exponentially higher than the arithmetic income is not changing. Well, it changed a little bit, thanks to no small degree in the improvements that we made in healthcare. And we just have to keep working harder at it. So, even though I think what I was saying when my 5 minutes elapsed is that voters of this state voted to change the order of things in Madison. And this, I think the speed with which this is coming is probably very startling. But I think at some level we had to have some feeling that it was coming. Having said that, I don't know that we should say that the voters were wrong. I think the debate needs to occur. And I think it will occur whether we pass this or not. And even though I came in not geared towards supporting it, I probably will.
Further discussion? I see no further discussion and request the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Duax.
Aye.
Kemp.
Aye.
Kincaid.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Pavelski.
Aye.
Von Hayden.
Aye.
Vu.
Aye.
Wax.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Resolution passes unanimously on a 10-0 vote. Wishes again to compliment my fellow council members on the way we do business. We are a city that works, and democracy is alive and well down here. I want to thank you again for just an outstanding discussion. On a motion then by Councilmember Klinkhammer, seconded by Councilmember Pavelski.
to happen with this resolution since time is of the essence.
Okay. A question has been raised. What happens now to the resolution? Mr. City Manager.
We will be using multiple ways of trying to communicate and share this with Madison.
And can you
our
articulate
ability to our ability to get that through, as you know, it's very hard to get through email, phone, letter is too slow. So we'll look at all those ways to try to communicate it to multiple people in joint finance, if it's still possible, and certainly to the legislature, and certainly to our legislators.
Thank you. I think I moved, and did I second it? Yes. This meeting is adjourned without objection.
You've just watched an Eau Claire City Council special meeting to discuss a resolution proposed by Councilmember Mark Olson opposing aspects of Governor Scott Walker's proposed budget repair bill. Before that was an appearance by Governor Scott Walker at McDonough Manufacturing in Eau Claire. These all took place on February 15th.